Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for having me and for the invitation. I've got 6 minutes basically to try and sum up what I'm thinking in terms of the ECHR. I'm going to refer mostly to speech cases, hate speech cases, which are the kind of area of the ECHR that I study. Several commentators discuss the issue of deportation of irregular migrants or the issue of immigration more generally when it comes to the ECHR and the decisions, but there are a lot of other rights under the European Convention on Human Rights which affect the UK and other member states of the Council of Europe, and one of them is the freedom of expression. And when I was reading the description of this panel, it referred to British values, and I think one of the basic values that you have in Britain is the right to freedom of expression. You were very strong in developing this right also within the framework of international human rights law in the drafting of the European Convention on Human Rights. So as a foreigner, when you say British value, one of the values is freedom of expression. The European Court of Human Rights has been absolutely awful when it comes to some of these hate speech cases. We have systematically seen the court agree with states that limit things like, take the case of Ferrer versus Belgium. It was a politician of the National Front who said in a leaflet, protect Belgium from Islam the Conqueror. And he was fined and he couldn't take office for 10 years. And the ECHR agreed that, this was correct, Belgium acted correctly. I'm going to give you just a couple of examples to make my point. The case of Liliendahl versus Iceland, a guy had written a comment under a post regarding some support system for trans students in schools, and he said, "Oh, this is disgusting. This is what is this?" The kind of comments about trans students, and he got fined. He got, these are all criminal penalties, by the way. And the ECHR came and said, "No, that's not allowed. We mustn't offend people," and what Iceland did in finding him was okay. We've had the case of Norwood versus the UK, a big hate speech case whereby a guy put a BNP post out his window saying Islam out of Britain, protect the British people. Now that case is very worrying because there was no legal analysis of Article 10, which was the right to free speech. There's different steps, like was it necessary, was it proportional? They just used Article 17, which prohibits the abuse of rights clause, prohibits the abuse of rights, to just kick his case out. So he had no kind of legal assessment of his claim. So hate speech case is very worrying at the ECHR, at least for me. I'd really like much more substance in the assessment. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that I think that we mustn't have the ECHR, or we mustn't have Strasbourg, or we mustn't have some kind of human rights framework. And I'll give you an example. There was a young girl a few years ago. I'm from Cyprus, I'm Cypriot, and she had come over to Ayia, if you know, the town, the party town, and she was brutally gang raped by over 10 men in a hotel room. And our legal system was absolutely horrific to her. It's a case of X versus Cyprus. We were absolutely awful to this young girl, and we even charged her for public mischief. We never considered her claim and anything. It was absolutely awful. It was humiliating and awful. And she sued us, Cyprus, at the European Court of Human Rights, and the European Court of Human Rights came back and said, "You know what? You have been sexist to this girl. You have been awful, you have humiliated her, etc., etc." So without the European Court of Human Rights, she wouldn't have some form of redress. Let's not forget that the European Court of Human Rights isn't a court that you would appeal to after you've exhausted your remedies on a local level. So on the one hand, I'm also confused. I don't really have an answer. I'm very, very skeptical, to say the least, of speech cases at the European Court of Human Rights. I am very worried about that. Also, I find it awful that even very basic, that essentially the court is adopting a viewpoint restrictive stance toward the freedom of expression. It's even imposing obligations on states to legislate and investigate alleged hate speech cases. So even if it's a case whereby a state decided, there's no case here, I'm not going to investigate. The ECHR has come in several cases against Armenia, Bulgaria, several other countries and said, no, you should have investigated. You should have had a law that criminalises this. So it gets even more worrying. But on the other hand, I give you the case of the girl in Cyprus and say, okay, what do we do with this? So I don't know how long I have left. Maybe a minute?
You've got just over a minute.
Just over a minute. So I think what I would say is, in terms of immigration, because I know my colleagues are going to discuss that more, we always have to remember that even if we kind of states within the Council of Europe region forgot the ECHR, let's not forget that we have international human rights law, the Refugee Convention that prohibits the principle of non-refoulement. So leaving the ECHR or leaving all these kind of institutions doesn't necessarily mean that things will change in terms of immigration, but at the same time, at the moment, we have the European Convention on Human Rights with certain limitations on freedom of expression. Those limitations could get much worse if we gave it to the government to choose, right? With even more limitations in terms of, discrimination or hate speech. There could actually be a provision on that. So I would be very, very worried leaving that to government. So just to sum up, hate speech cases, if you are interested to see what the ECHR is doing wrong in terms of freedom of expression, then have a look. Because it's systematically doing it wrong. It's always prohibiting offensive speech. It's come to the point where it says even prejudicial speech is not to be allowed and is to be dealt with under criminal law. And that for me is worrying, and I'm stopping now and hope I've